from across the street, through the fogged glass of a quiet corner cafe. I had the perfect view of the 24th floor, Carjack's Global Operations Boardroom. Inside, they were demoing Miracore to a room full of executives and international partners. The system I built, the same system they locked me out of. I sipped my cold coffee slowly, eyes fixed on the flickering reflection of the wall screen across the glass. Something was wrong. The dashboard was stalling. Route indicators pulsed red. Someone in that room had just rerouted a shipment from Rotterdam to Kansas? I flipped open my laptop. Not to access the system, I couldn't. They had revoked my credentials the moment they restructured me out of the team. But Miracore had layers, and I'd left one behind. A diagnostic trace, passive, invisible, untraceable, unless you knew exactly where to look. I did. The screen stuttered. A terminal message flashed. Unrecognized override attempt. Then again, 3 times. Same IP, same admin ID, winslow.mira. I froze. They were using my credentials. Or worse, someone cloned them. That wasn't just wrong, it was criminal, back in the boardroom. I could see Trent pacing. He never looked good under pressure. The guy barely knew how the system worked, let alone what to do when it failed in real time. I recognized the intern next to him, nervously jabbing keys on a wireless keyboard. Her face said everything. This was spiraling. They had overwritten a freight simulation during a live route rebalancing. Rookie move, dangerous one. Miracore didn't like brute force changes. It treated them like cyber threats. I built it that way on purpose. They thought they could push me out and still keep my work running smoothly. I hit a few keys and initiated a data snapshot of the override attempt. Timestamped, fingerprinted, archived. This wasn't just system failure. It was mishandling, impersonation, and technical negligence rolled into one clean digital footprint. Exactly the kind of thing lawyers love. I closed the laptop quietly. Outside, Trent waved a technician over in panic. I leaned back in my chair, heart calm but eyes sharp. They didn't know it yet, but the system had started remembering, and so had I. Tomorrow, they'd call, but tonight, I'd let the glitch speak for itself. There used to be a time when I believed the walls would remember, not just the work, the effort, the after hours, the lives that passed through, the voices left behind in flickering monitor light long after everyone else had gone home. But on that Tuesday evening, the hallway was empty. I walked it like a ghost. The offices at Cargex were quieter than usual. Everyone had left by 7. No all-nighters anymore, no overtime warriors. The new regime didn't like unnecessary presence. They liked automation, optimization, clean transitions. I stopped outside the engineering bay. My old station was still there, tucked in the corner beneath a buzzing light that had flickered since 2019. No one had ever fixed it. Somehow, that felt poetic. The desk hadn't changed. Same dull beige monitor, same chair with the ripped fabric on the armrest, same cactus plant I left behind. It was still alive. Somehow, reaching toward the glass. And the photo, still taped to the divider, bent at the corners. My mother, smiling from a hospital bed, back when she could still recognize me. I didn't cry. I just stood there, staring at that photo the way I used to during late nights, when I had one hand on the keyboard and one holding the phone, listening to doctors tell me about new medications, new symptoms, new bills. Every line of code I wrote in those years wasn't just to prove a point. It was to keep her alive. That was what most people never saw. They saw the automation, the dashboards, the cost savings. They didn't see the night I skipped sleep to rewrite an entire freight sync module because the Eastern Seaboard was overloading. They didn't see the day I coded with a fever because my mother had fallen and I didn't have time to be sick myself. They didn't see me, but the system did. MiraCore wasn't just an algorithm. It was the architecture of my brain, mapped across a neural decision engine. I built it to think like I did, fast, cautious, adaptive. A tool meant to extend me, not replace me, but to them. That distinction didn't matter. Weeks ago, I had noticed small things. I wasn't looped into weekly check-ins. Trent stopped copying me on data reviews. One of my analysis reports came back reformatted by a junior staffer, stripped of everything meaningful. My suggestions? Thanks. We'll consider them in Q4. The same suggestions they'd used 2 weeks later, renamed and repackaged. Then one day, I caught it. A stack of papers left at the communal printer, careless. Among them, a copy of the internal performance audit. It had all the names and designations. There I was, 2 pages in. Winslow, Mira, redundant risk. Recommend phased transition. Notes. Automated system development has reduced need for current skill set. Role can be redistributed. Under innovation impact, it read, automated self into obsolescence. That line sat there like poison. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't march into Trent's office. I didn't rip the papers up. I just walked back to my desk, sat down in that torn old chair, and looked at the photograph again. If I'd been less careful, maybe they would have valued me more. If I'd written a less powerful system, maybe I'd still have a seat at the table. If I hadn't worked so hard to protect the company, maybe they wouldn't see me as a threat. But there's a thing about building smart systems. They don't forget. That night, I opened my personal drive and ran one final sweep of the MiraCore source code. Clean, intact, untouched. I inserted a secondary log tracker deep inside the architecture, one that couldn't be seen without root-level permissions. Its job was simple. Record every override, every foreign login, every IP that tried to force its way into the system. A black box. Silent but exact. The file name was simple, blackboxseed.log, before I left the office that night. I stood for one last look at the photo, and I whispered to no one but the blinking lights above me. If they've decided I don't belong, then I want the truth to remember me. Most people write code to solve a problem. I wrote MiraCore to remember who I was. Sitting in my apartment long past midnight, I watched the lines of code dance across my screen. Familiar, silent, methodical. Not just logic, not just syntax. It was memory. My memory. They thought I built a tool. What I really built was a reflection. Every piece of MiraCore had my fingerprints, not literally, but philosophically. I didn't want an AI that just followed rules. I wanted one that knew why rules existed, that hesitated when a shortcut looked too good, that adjusted under stress instead of collapsing, that thought, in the ways I'd learned to think after a decade of hard choices. I trained it with real-world scenarios. I fed it the moments no spreadsheet could explain, rerouting during winter storms, warehouse delays because of union strikes, partner pullouts at the last minute. I'd tag each data point not just with outcomes, but with the logic I used to get there. And over time, MiraCore started to anticipate me. Once, I ran a silent simulation during peak season. A shipment was headed from Marseille to Newark, but a sudden surge in fuel prices made an alternate route through Halifax look cheaper. MiraCore paused, calculated, then declined the detour, even though the numbers said yes. Why? Because months earlier, I had marked that route as unstable during winter due to unreliable customs clearance. The AI had remembered the risk and mirrored the caution I didn't even realize I'd coded into it. That night, I laughed out loud, alone, in a chair with a loose leg, under flickering kitchen lights. "It's learning me," I whispered. That was the moment I knew it was no longer just software. It was my quiet apprentice. Of course, the company didn't understand that. They only saw speed and savings. They saw dashboards updating in real time, logistics flowing without human input. They saw efficiency. They didn't see the conscience. So I built in a layer they'd never find. I called it a dead man switch, if I wasn't authenticated into the system within 14 days. Miracore would begin to scale down root-level access. After 21 days, it would lock itself, not crash, not delete, just freeze, like a vault waiting for the right voice. And the key? Not a password, not a login, a string of metadata encrypted into a file I'd buried deep in the source architecture. It could only be decrypted using my original hardware signature, the same laptop I was using now. It was like giving Miracore its own fingerprint and making mine the only hand that matched. But that wasn't the only precaution I took. Quiet pride is a strange thing. It doesn't yell, it doesn't demand, it just prepares. I wrote one final script, a silent listener, hidden within a cluster of AI training files. It activated only under specific conditions, when someone tried to override the system using admin privileges linked to my name. The log would trigger and begin recording every attempt, timestamps, IPs, user tokens, physical locations, everything, all stored in a single file, blackboxseed.log. The name was no accident. A seed, buried in the soil, invisible until it's needed. I didn't plant it for revenge. I planted it because I didn't trust them. I knew how companies rewrote history. I knew how easily stories got cleaned up for HR documents and press releases. Employee left voluntarily. AI system fully proprietary. No internal ownership claims remain. But the code would remember. And one day, if they ever crossed the line, if they pushed me out and tried to use what I made to build their own version of the truth, I'd have a record, not just of what they did, but of how they did it. That was the difference between my system and theirs. They built for profit. I built for integrity, and I wasn't done yet. The letter was waiting when I got back from the break room. My name was on the envelope, printed in block letters, slid neatly onto my desk like a memo someone had forgotten to sign. I opened it with the same calm I used to approach corrupted code. Careful, methodical, knowing the damage had already been done. Effective as of 10:01 a.m., not 10 o'clock, not close of business. Just 10:01, a minute into the workday. Just long enough for them to say I was technically still on the payroll when they sent the notice. HR didn't meet me in person. They called from across the building and asked me to stop by. I went. Because of course I did. There were rules, and I still followed them, even in exile. The HR rep, a woman I'd once helped navigate a maternity leave scheduling bug, looked down the whole time. Her words were memorized, read like a privacy policy. Position redundancy due to automation consolidation. We thank you for your contributions to Cargex's growth and wish you success in your future endeavors. She handed me a form, asked me to sign. There was a checkbox for NDA, a checkbox for IP ownership, and another that simply read, "Acknowledges return of company property." She didn't ask about the system I'd built. Didn't ask if I had questions. Didn't ask anything at all. I nodded once and walked back to my desk with 30 minutes on the clock and a cardboard box under my arm. The office looked different now. Grayer, smaller, the walls closer together. People shifted at their stations but didn't look up. Some knew, some didn't. A few probably assumed I was just moving teams. That's how clean cuts like mine worked. You disappeared before anyone noticed you were bleeding. At my desk. I packed slowly. Not because I needed time, but because I refused to let them rush me. I picked up the cactus, the thumb drive I used for diagnostics, the coffee mug that said, "Trust your algorithms," and then the photograph. My mother, tucked under too many hospital blankets, giving me the last full smile I ever got from her. The smile of someone who didn't know her mind was leaving, who thought I was just visiting, not caregiving. I stared at that photo until my fingers went numb. I didn't fail. Mom, I whispered. I just finished before they knew what I'd started. No one said goodbye. There were no cards, no group email, no awkward team huddle around a cake. Just the soft thunk of my laptop closing and the cardboard edges pressing against my hip. I passed through the hallway like a memory fading from a room. But as I approached the IT wing, I slowed. The door to the glass-walled server room was open. Inside, I spotted someone seated at the MiraCore console, my console. Young, nervous, hands hovering over the keyboard, like they weren't sure what would bite back. It was the intern, the one who'd been shadowing Trent's assistant last month. The one who once asked me how to refresh a query without breaking the cache. He was now seated in front of the system that ran multi-billion-dollar operations across 3 continents. A screen blinked with a configuration tab. Another showed code branching in real time. He was moving windows around, clearly unsure of what each one did. I didn't stop, didn't press my hand to the glass, but I watched. For exactly 10 seconds. Long enough to understand they hadn't just removed me. They'd replaced me with someone who didn't know the difference between autocorrect and auto-collapse. The irony made me want to laugh, but it settled into something colder. They handed a scalpel to someone still learning how to hold a pen. At the exit gate, my badge light blinked red. Access denied. I didn't flinch. In my pocket was the external drive, still warm from my hand. It held every line of original code, the behavioral trees, the dead man switch, and a log that had already begun recording every override attempt since the minute I was locked out. They thought they were done with me, but the system still remembered, and so did I. It started with a warning on my screen. Monday morning, 8:17 a.m., 14 days since they fired me. I was folding laundry, a cup of green tea cooling on the windowsill, when the alert popped up on my diagnostics monitor, silent and precise. Unauthorized root access detected. No panic, no surprise, just confirmation. Just like watching the first drop fall before a storm you'd already smelled in the air. MiraCore wasn't built to crash suddenly. It degraded with signs, data conflicts, signal drops, and, if they were foolish enough, override attempts that triggered internal defenses. They were foolish enough. By 9:04 a.m., the Southeast Asia node had gone dark. Routing instructions from the Singapore hub failed to sync with the European terminals. AI-generated predictions stalled. The system began auto-flagging every manual override as a threat. Across the city, at Cargex headquarters. I imagined the room growing louder by the minute. I didn't need to be there to know the panic unfolding. My phone rang. Then again. Then again. I let it vibrate off the edge of the table. They called. I let it ring. I walked to the kitchen and rinsed my mug. Outside, the traffic hummed. Inside, MiraCore hummed louder. They didn't know what they were dealing with. Not really. They'd stripped my credentials, but left my code running like it hadn't been raised by human hands. The intern they gave access to likely triggered the failsafes. The root security layer, the one only I knew how to pacify, had activated. My screen blinked again. Emergency reroute. Marseille, Budapest, Zurich. Error, node mismatch. Error cascade. Sync delay exceeds safety threshold. I opened my encrypted tracker. Each failure logged in real time. By 9:35 a.m., a full third of European shipments were either misrouted or frozen in queue. Still. I said nothing. Still. They called. I muted the phone. At 10:02, a new alert came in, this time from my passive client-side notifier. It wasn't a system message. It was a contractual flag from a client I'd personally onboarded 7 years ago, Global Port GmbH. They were terminating their service agreement. 3 shipments had been routed to the wrong warehouses, one in Poland, one in southern France, one in Romania. Each delay cost them tens of thousands. A single week's backlog would cause cascading losses during peak logistics season. In total, $2.4 million in damages. And that was only one client. I stared at the message for a long time. Not with satisfaction, not with anger, just with stillness. I logged it manually. Client fallout, day 14. Then I opened blackboxseed.log. A new line had appeared. Admin override attempt. IP 10.1.7.22. User token T.Marlowe status. Unauthorized, blocked. Trent had tried to break into the system again. He had no idea the system had already recorded everything. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just saved the file, encrypted it again, and closed the lid of my laptop. Outside, the city moved like any other day. Inside, they were trying to patch what they never learned to build. I thought of the interns scrambling, of Trent barking useless orders, of HR checking manuals too late. They fired me because I made myself too effective. But without the one person who taught the system how to think, they'd never learn how to fix it when it stopped listening. They called. I let it ring. And the silence, finally, began to answer back. There are 2 kinds of anger: the kind that roars in your throat, breaks dishes, screams into empty rooms, and the kind that settles into your bones, moves through your bloodstream like smoke, and waits. What I felt was the second kind. I opened my laptop in the stillness of my apartment, the curtains drawn, the world muted. The chaos at Cargex was still unraveling, but I hadn't spoken a word. I hadn't written a single email. I didn't need to. The system had already been speaking for me. I entered my encryption key and decrypted the most recent update to blackboxseed.log. The file took a moment to load. It was large now, pages of entries, each one a fingerprint of misused authority, of fear disguised as control. My eyes stopped at a cluster of 7 entries grouped tightly together. All bore the same token. Winslow, Mira, all from the same IP. HQ Terminal 4B. Override attempt 1. Denied override attempt 2. Denied, Override attempt 7. Blocked. Root lock engaged 7 times. 7 separate attempts to access root-level commands using credentials that hadn't been active in 2 weeks. They weren't just using my name. They were fighting to get inside it. I clenched my fist. Not from fear, but from a deeper betrayal. Trent had told HR that my departure was non-contentious, told his board I had willingly off-boarded, told clients I had transitioned out smoothly. But while the ink on my exit paperwork was still drying, he'd been trying to resurrect my identity like a dead keycard, forcing it through the system I built, and the system had kept the receipt. I copied the cluster into a new file, labeled it Root Misuse. Trent sequence, the rage inside me didn't erupt. It concentrated, hardened, became surgical. I didn't even flinch when the new email notification appeared in the top right corner of my screen. The subject line was blank, the sender anonymized, but the body was only one line. You should see this before they bury it. There was an attachment. I scanned it for malware. Clean. It was a security feed recording, time-stamped 3 days ago. The camera angle suggested a conference room, maybe one of the mid-tier IT meeting spaces on the 5th floor. The grainy feed flickered to life. There was Trent, standing with his sleeves rolled up, pacing in tight, frustrated circles, and sitting across from him, the intern, the same one I'd seen behind the MiraCore console the day I left. He looked uncomfortable, small. His fingers nervously tapped a laptop, then paused. The sound was low, but I turned up the gain. I just don't want to break anything, the intern said, his voice barely above a whisper. You won't, Trent snapped. Just follow the steps. Use Winslow's credentials. Copy the sequence exactly. The system still thinks she's around. That's the whole point. Silence. Then Trent leaned closer. This doesn't get logged? Understood? It did. Every keystroke, every override, every desperate attempt. The camera timestamp blinked out, and the video ended. I stared at the frozen frame of the intern's pale face. So this was it. Not just negligence, not just arrogance, intent. They didn't just fire me. They tried to impersonate me, and they dragged a kid into it. Too, someone barely old enough to rent a car. Now being coached into ethical collapse because a middle-aged executive didn't understand the difference between control and competence. I saved the video to a secure drive, labeled it simply Video Evidence, Coercion. The system was no longer just protecting its code. It was protecting the person who made it human. Outside, the sun had started to break through the clouds. I hadn't realized how dark the apartment had gotten. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need clarity. I had proof. They wanted silence. But the system had memory. And I had just uncovered its first confession. The letter arrived in a thick white envelope, stamped with a corporate law firm's insignia, 3 cold initials embossed in silver, RMT. The kind of firm that only gets involved when a company wants to silence something, or someone, quickly. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it on my counter for a while. The corner slightly curled. The air felt still, like the apartment itself was waiting to see what I'd do. When I finally broke the seal, the headline was bold and final. Notice of legal action. Alleged sabotage and IP misuse. Inside were 72 pages of accusations, demands, and thinly veiled threats. They were claiming that I had intentionally disrupted Cargex operations through unauthorized logic dependencies in Miracore, that I had withheld source code, that I was in possession of company IP and had refused to cooperate in the system's full transfer of ownership. They also included a proposed NDA, non-disclosure agreement, 17 pages of legally binding silence, in exchange for my cooperation and return of all proprietary materials. They would drop the charges. The catch? I had to surrender everything: my logs, my source code backups, my encryption tools, and the decryption key. It was, in essence, a muzzle and a trap. I was expected to crawl back, sign my name, and disappear, neatly, quietly, permanently, the following week. I sat in a sterile glass conference room inside a neutral legal office. A panel of 3 corporate lawyers sat across from me, their suits sharp, their smiles plastic. A junior associate handed me a printed version of the NDA, bound like a novella. "This agreement protects both parties," one of them said. "I doubt that," I replied. Without looking up, "We advise full compliance." The other added, "Pushing back will only increase litigation and potential damages." I nodded slowly. Once. They took it as agreement. They misunderstood. Because while they talked, I was thinking of the log, the one they'd never asked about, the one they didn't know had already been archived, encrypted, and tucked into a secure location off-grid. They wanted to erase my voice, so I decided to amplify the truth instead. That night, I opened my encrypted drive. Inside, blackboxseed.logroot misuse, Trent sequence, the video clip of the intern, and a time-stamped export of every unauthorized override attempt. I selected 3 files, then drafted 3 emails. Each message was direct, respectful, and almost impersonal. No accusations, no emotions, just facts. The first went to Global Port GmbH, the European logistics partner that had canceled its contract after the system failure. The second to Zenmaru Freight, a Japanese firm I had helped on board 2 years ago. And the third to Polar Rail Inc., a Canadian outfit known for its meticulous compliance standards. Subject line for each: "You deserve to know who really built your systems." No explanation. Just a single PDF attachment titled Technical Authorship, log summary, and a checksum hash for validation. I made no threats, offered no commentary, let the data speak. I hit send. Then, back in that same cold conference room the next morning, I returned their packet, unsigned. One of the attorneys raised an eyebrow. "You'll be liable for breach of contract, Miss Winslow." I slid my phone across the table. On screen, a live read receipt from all 3 emails, each one marked opened. "I wouldn't worry about that," I said calmly. "I think the breach already happened. You just didn't log it." The room fell silent. For once, their smiles cracked. Pressure doesn't always make people cave. Sometimes, it clarifies, it sharpens. It reminds you that silence isn't always submission. It's a loaded pause. They had tried to trap me in paper, but I spoke in code, in logs, in proof. I left the conference room with nothing but my drive, my voice intact, and a truth they could no longer contain. And that was louder than anything I could have said in court. I didn't need a team. I just needed one drive. The night before the arbitration hearing, I sat at my kitchen table, the glow from my laptop casting long shadows across an otherwise quiet room. In front of me was a USB, 64 GB, steel-cased, fingerprint encrypted, small enough to lose in a purse, heavy enough to carry the weight of every lie they'd told. I wasn't nervous, not anymore. On screen, a folder labeled ARB Packet Final blinked back at me. Inside it, I had bundled everything, every override attempt logged, metadata timestamped and signed by the machine that built Miracore. My machine, the video file of the intern, screenshots of system messages, the blackboxseed.log entries, the export from the original device used to write the root code, with hash signatures for verification. I clicked through each file one last time. I'd been meticulous. Redundant backups, offline encryption, nothing left to chance. The final file opened with a soft chime, a metadata printout tagged to my unique device ID. Primary source, Mira.Winslow, device ID, LGT7148, root commit time, 3:14 a.m. The same laptop, the same fingerprints, the same truth they'd tried to bury. I closed the screen, slid the USB into its case, and exhaled. A knock came at the door. It was late, past 10, but I knew who it was before I even stood. Lily. She'd texted earlier, said she had something. No details. Just those 3 words. She stood in the hallway, holding a paper envelope and an external hard drive like she didn't want to be seen. Her coat was buttoned too tight for the weather, eyes darting, voice low. "I'm not staying," she said quickly. "I just couldn't not bring this." I let her in. She handed me the envelope first. Inside was a USB of her own, labeled by hand, audio, planning session. I looked up. "You recorded a meeting?" She nodded, eyes heavy. "Not intentionally. It was during a system rollout prep 3 weeks before the handover. I was documenting protocol updates. I didn't even realize what I'd captured until yesterday." I plugged it in and played the file. The audio was grainy, but clear enough. Trent's voice came through, sharp and smug. "Winslow won't be here by launch. We need someone flashier in front of investors. Once the codebase stabilizes, we phase her out quietly. She's not brand friendly." My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. He hadn't just fired me. He'd planned to replace me before the system was even finished. The whole narrative about automation and redundancy, it had always been a cover. I looked at Lily. Her face was pale. "I didn't know they'd take it this far. I thought I don't know. Maybe you'd left on your own terms." "I didn't." She nodded once, like the world was realigning inside her. "I don't want to be a witness on paper," she said. "But if you need someone to confirm the chain of events, I'll back you. You mentored me. The least I can do is not stay silent now." There was a pause. "Do you think I'll end up like you?" she asked. I almost laughed, but not from humor. Not if you remember who you are when no one's watching, I replied. She gave a small smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, then stepped back toward the door. I'll be at the building tomorrow, just outside, just in case. I nodded, watching her leave. The door closed with a soft click, and the room returned to silence. I picked up her drive and added it to mine. Then I placed both into the soft interior of a leather folder, zipped it shut, and laid it gently into my bag. Tomorrow, they'd show up with lawyers and binders. I'd show up with memory, not just the systems. Mine. Lily's. The kind that couldn't be reformatted or rewritten. They thought I would walk in defenseless. They'd soon learn that silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes, it's the sound a blade makes, right before it lands. They came with briefcases. 5 of them, flanked by assistants, legal counsel, and one public relations observer in a Navy suit who never said a word. Cargex's arbitration team arrived early, confident, clicking through binders and slides in a sterile, glass-walled conference room rented by the tribunal. I came alone. No lawyer, no entourage, just a leather case under my arm and a clear, focused mind. 3 arbitrators sat at the head of the table. 2 men, 1 woman, all neutral, all silent as the proceedings began. Trent Marlowe sat to the right, fingers tapping rhythmically against his chair, eyes skimming every page as if he'd already won. The Cargex lead counsel stood and launched into a well-rehearsed statement. Miracore is, and always has been, a proprietary development created under contract within the scope of Ms. Winslow's employment. As such, all source code, operational logic, and associated digital tools fall under Cargex intellectual property rights. She clicked a slide showing Mira's job title, another highlighting the company's innovation timeline, another stating, all IP created under employment belongs to employer. Trent folded his arms and leaned back. Satisfied. We contend, the lawyer added, that Ms. Winslow has withheld key system data and encryption tools and has engaged in activity harmful to system performance since her separation. A few heads turned my way. I didn't speak. Not yet. One arbitrator, a silver-haired man with a slight frown, cleared his throat. Ms. Winslow, do you have a response? I stood up slowly. No notes, no counterslide. I do, I said. But I'd rather let the system respond for me. I reached into my case and removed a single USB. Simple, unbranded, clean. I walked to the display terminal in the center of the room and plugged it in. The screen came to life. A black console window appeared with green lettering, initializing metadata trace. Device ID, LGT7148. User ID, Winslow.Mira. Timestamp, 3:14 a.m. March 2nd. Root commit registered signed certificate. U.S. Federal Intellectual Property Registry status. Verified. Original author. The room went still. No one breathed. The metadata scrolled further. Logs of development hours, local device hashes, Git signature trails, and a digital license issued through the government-backed IP registry system. One arbitrator leaned forward. Is this the original environment you built the code in? Yes, I said. Every file, every line, from the first root commit to the last system update, archived with author credentials and digital chain of custody validation. Trent opened his mouth, but the words caught somewhere between surprise and denial. I wasn't done. I clicked again. The room dimmed slightly as a video began to play. Low quality. Time stamped in the corner. A boardroom camera. Trent pacing. A young intern sitting nervously across from him. Just copy Winslow's login credentials. Trent snapped in the clip. It's still active. The system won't know the difference. The intern looked terrified. The clip froze on his face. I stopped the playback. One of the arbitrators looked toward Kargex's counsel. "We'll need to examine the validity of this evidence further," he said carefully. "But the IP registry signature is definitive." The Kargex lawyer began flipping through her binder. Faster, pointlessly. Trent's voice finally broke through. "This doesn't change anything," he muttered. "She was on payroll when she wrote it." Another arbitrator, the woman in the center, looked up. "Ownership isn't about who issued the paycheck. It's about who authored the code, who holds the legal proof, which, at this point, seems undeniable." I didn't smirk, didn't flinch. The room now belonged to silence. After a moment, I removed the USB, returned it to its case, and looked toward the arbitrators. "I have nothing further to add," I said. They nodded. One of them made a note. Another excused us while they entered recess for review. As I walked out, Trent didn't look at me. The intern from the video was seated just outside, fidgeting with a pen. He didn't look at me either. But I paused at the door and said softly, "It's not too late to tell the truth yourself." Then I stepped into the sunlight. They had come expecting a defense. Instead, I gave them memory, raw, traceable, incorruptible. And now, it was on record. By the next morning, the headlines had already made their way across 4 continents. AI ownership scandal rocks, Kargex, whistleblower metadata, verified in arbitration. System built by fired engineer triggers, corporate legal crisis. Kargex shares plunge after developer, proves sole authorship of core AI platform. The articles didn't mention my name in the opening paragraphs, but the deeper you read, the more details aligned. Mira Winslow, independent author. Federal registry trace. Arbitration evidence. Developer override logs. Root commit timestamps. And one simple line that repeated like a drumbeat. The code remembered her. By 12 o'clock p.m., Kargex stock had dropped 17%. By 3 o'clock p.m., 2 major international clients, Global Port GmbH and Zen Maru Freight, announced their decision to terminate existing contracts, citing instability in system ownership and ethical misalignment with vendor leadership. And by 5:20 p.m., Trent Marlowe was suspended. The official statement was sterilized. Of course. Pending review. Temporary reassignment. Strategic leadership transition. But I had no doubt the call had been cold and immediate. I watched it all unfold on a muted TV screen inside a quiet cafe. My tea untouched. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I simply felt air return to my lungs, as if the weight of being discredited had been pressing on my chest for months without me realizing it. And now, finally, I could breathe again. Around 6:40 p.m., I received a call, not from HR, not from legal, this time. It was the CEO herself. I didn't answer at first. I let it ring out. Then read the voicemail. "Mira, we'd like to open a conversation about returning, about your role, and how we can move forward. We believe there's a path to rebuilding trust." Trust. That was the word they always used when they wanted control dressed as collaboration. The next day, I returned their call, politely, briefly, and made it clear I wouldn't be rejoining the company. "But," I added, "I'm open to discussing a licensing agreement." There was a pause on the other end. "I'm willing," I continued, "to authorize the ongoing use of Miracore under a formal contract. It will include attribution of authorship, royalties, and usage limits based on compliance. You don't need me in the building, you just need me on the ledger." Another pause. Then a clipped response. "We'll have our legal team review a draft." I ended the call with 2 words. Send it soon. Later that night, I sat alone with a soft lamp glowing behind me and my laptop open, reviewing the royalty structure I would propose. It wasn't about the money, Not really. It was about reclaiming the narrative, turning what they thought they owned into something they now had to earn. They wanted to cut me out of the story. Instead, they'd have to pay to keep reading it. I wasn't angry anymore. I was acknowledged. And in this quiet vindication, I found something I never expected. Not power, not revenge, just peace. It wasn't about winning anymore. The game had changed, and I wasn't playing defense. I was rewriting the rules entirely. The morning after the arbitration fallout, I received a formal proposal from Carjex's legal team. It was cautiously worded, equal parts concession and containment. They offered licensing fees, limited public acknowledgement, and ongoing access to MyraCore. But they still wanted the decryption key, and they still assumed I would hand it over. Quietly, to keep the business afloat. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I took a walk, 9 a.m., a slow loop around the lake trail near my apartment. For the first time in months, maybe years. I wasn't trying to outrun anything. The air felt lighter, my steps had no urgency, and in that stillness, my answer became clear. When I returned, I opened my laptop, crafted a 3-line reply, and hit send. I'm willing to release the key under one condition: full and irrevocable transfer of the MyraCore source code to my name, along with public attribution in all future deployments. No counteroffers, no soft language, just the terms. By 3:15 p.m., they responded. Reluctantly, they agreed. The paperwork came that evening, 43 pages. Reviewed by their team, stamped, signed. The source code would legally be mine. All derivative versions would be licensed through me. Cargex would operate as a licensee, not an owner, and most importantly, a public statement would be issued confirming me as MyraCore's sole creator and lead architect. I signed at 6:22 p.m., digitally notarized. Then, and only then, I uploaded the decryption key through a secure handoff portal. For the first time, the system they tried to take from me was running with full awareness that I built it, owned it, and could reclaim it any time. But I wasn't finished. That night, as the world moved on to other headlines, I prepared one final move. Not for profit, not for leverage, but for something far deeper. I created a compressed build of MyraCore, stripped down. No sensitive infrastructure, no corporate identifiers, just the base logic engine, the ethical heuristics layer, and the memory architecture that had once learned me. I named the file MyraCore, seed build, open.sevens. Then I sent it to the Global Alliance for Ethical AI, a nonprofit watchdog group that monitored algorithmic governance, data fairness, and global equity standards in machine learning systems. The email subject line read, "For transparency, for oversight, for balance." Inside was a note. "This version isn't weaponized. It remembers patterns, but it won't replicate harm. Use it to build better systems, not bigger ones." No one at Cargex knew I'd sent it. I didn't need them to, because I hadn't just taken control of the past. I'd ensured a future where no one could quietly erase the hands behind the work again. At 10 p.m., I shut my laptop. No press release, no announcement, just the soft hum of the system syncing across trusted servers worldwide. Control wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was quiet, steady, measured, and for the first time, it was mine, without needing anyone's permission. The red circle on the floor was smaller than I'd imagined. Under the stage lights, I could see the outlines of the crowd, but not their faces, just silhouettes, waiting, watching. I adjusted the mic, cleared my throat gently, and began. Not with code, not with credentials, but with a sentence I'd rehearsed 100 times in my head and only now felt brave enough to speak aloud. They fired me after I automated my own job, but they couldn't run it without my decryption key. A ripple of soft laughter rolled across the audience. I let it land, then continued. I'm not here to talk about revenge, I said. I'm here to talk about memory. Behind me, the screen lit up with a single image, an old photo of my desk at Cargex, a coffee-stained notebook, a faded sticky note with a line of code, and one frame in the corner, a photo of my mother, smiling weakly from a hospital bed. For years, I built quietly, nights, weekends, lunch breaks, not for glory, not even for ambition. I built because someone I loved needed me to keep going. I paused. And when they let me go, without warning, without gratitude, they didn't just discard my job. They tried to erase the hands behind the machine. On the next slide, a line of console code appeared, the kind that most people wouldn't notice in a system's deep logic core. If override detected, log user ID and encrypt, black box seed. I wrote that line 6 years ago. A line of self-defense, not for the system, for myself. Because deep down, I knew the day might come when I'd need the system to remember me, even when people didn't. The room was still now. Not a cough, not a whisper. I'm here to tell young engineers this. Don't just build smart systems. Build systems that remember who you are, that echo your integrity, that reflect the work you put in, even when your badge no longer opens the front door. A beat. Because one day, your silence might be the only evidence you have. And one line of truth, buried deep enough, can rewrite everything. The audience stood as I stepped off the circle. I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I just exhaled, slowly, feeling a weight leave me for good. By 9:00 p.m., the video hit 2 million views. By midnight, a trending hashtag had emerged, Code Remembers, and by 8:15 a.m. the next day, I received a call from Horizon Sentient, a global AI firm with operations in 42 countries. The woman on the other end introduced herself not as a recruiter, but as a former software engineer. "We saw your talk," she said. "We're not looking to hire a developer. We're looking to appoint our first ever global director of creative rights, an advocate for programmers, builders, and ethical authorship." There was a pause. Then she added, "And we think it should be you." I didn't answer right away, not because I was unsure, but because I was stunned that, at last, someone understood this was never about code. It was about credit, about protection, about not letting another brilliant, overworked mind be erased just because someone else held the login screen. That evening, I walked the same trail I had before, the lake glittering under soft light, birds tracing their arcs above the water. Only this time, I knew what I'd built mattered, not because it made a system smart, but because it gave voice to the people behind the system, and the system, finally, had remembered me.